I have to start out by saying right away that I'm rather happily employed. I make decent money, and my family is very well taken care of. Unfortunately, however, that was not always the case. This story happened near the beginning of the Great Recession. I'm sure a lot of people can remember how bad things were at the time. I worked as a facilitator in a call center company. My entire job was training people about how to work on the phones. It was a 3-week course for each class, and once it was done, it started over with a brand new class. At some point, the company decided not to use full-time facilitators anymore. Apparently, they considered us some money drain or something. What they did instead was use call center workers in the summer and fall to do the training. They were paid less than we were and didn't get a bonus for doing the training either, so off we went. I had severance for a few months, but that was hardly a comfort. I had children, and I needed to find a job in order to take care of them. Everyone at the time was cutting employees, not hiring them, so I was not having any luck in finding a new job. When I was in the parking lot of a grocery store, a friend of mine came over to talk to me. She was one of those kind of annoying people who always trapped you in a conversation and wouldn't let you go. She was also kind of weird and into some shady things every now and then. I knew that she sold drugs on the side because she had offered me some in the past. Of course, I declined, and she'd since stopped talking about it. This time, though, she asked me if I had found a new job yet. I told her that I did not, and it was getting a bit difficult, as the severance money was quickly running out. I had no idea what I was going to do if I couldn't find a job before that and my savings were depleted. That was when she told me that she might be able to help me find a new job. I was somewhat dubious about this offer, considering her history, and insisted I did not want to do anything illegal. She reassured me, though, that it wasn't anything like that. She took out this piece of paper with a phone number on it and told me to call that number and mentioned that she was the one who had told me to call. Then, for the first time ever, she left the talk before I did. That was really quite strange for her, and I didn't know what to think about it. After a while, I decided it couldn't hurt to just try out the number though, and see what exactly was going on here. I called, and someone picked up on the second ring. They gave me the name of the business, something I had never heard of before, and asked how they could help me. I gave them all the information my friend had given me, and they told me they could set up an interview the very next day. I was given an address, and they hung up the phone soon after. I was quite excited because everything seemed to be very legit, and I really had not expected it to be. I would be able to go to the interview immediately after I dropped the kids off at school. I didn't have a GPS or anything, so I had to find the place on my own. I drove, and when I was getting closer, I realized this was in a rather seedy part of town. In fact, it was an area with a lot of industrial buildings that had been closed down. Therefore, there was basically no traffic or cars or anything in the area. I kept checking the different addresses, trying to find the right one. Eventually, I did find it, because I recalled the name of the company. What stood out the most to me upon pulling up to this address was that there were no cars in the lot at all. I guessed to myself that maybe the employees parked in the back or something. I didn't give it too much thought because the business could definitely still be running even with some other closed ones in the area. I got parked at what was marked as a spot for guests. Then I got out of the car. I walked up to the building, but as I did, I started to get very nervous. It didn't look like anyone was inside, and it was very scary walking up to it like this all alone. I walked up to the door and opened it. It was unlocked, and at first I breathed a sigh of relief. I was initially thinking I had been sent to a closed building. I went inside, and my relief quickly left me. There was no one at the reception desk. There were not any lights on, and the place was definitely deserted. I walked over to the elevator, pushing the button. Maybe the reception area was simply closed, but the place I was supposed to work at was further in and open. When I pressed the button though, to my surprise, there was no power, and the elevator did nothing. I stood there for a moment, not exactly sure what I was going to do, and that's when I heard it. I heard a voice saying something in the distance. I couldn't totally make it out. It seemed to be coming from the staircase beside the elevators. I decided to go and open the door and try to hear what was being said. I opened the door and immediately wished that I had not. A loud voice was coming from below, chanting over and over, "It's for you, Lord. Come to me, Lord. It's for you." The voice was coming from down the stairs in the basement of the building. I was frozen for a moment and decided to close the door quietly. I didn't know what was going on in that basement, but it certainly had nothing to do with any job interviews. I intended to walk out of the building quietly, but my fear got the best of me. I sprinted out and got into my car. As I was driving out, I noticed several people now standing in front of the building, watching me leave. They weren't dressed like business people though. They were all wearing these sort of robes or something. They just watched me as I left, and I sped away from this freaky as fuck sight. When I got home, I went to call my friend who had suggested that I go there in the first place. She didn't answer the phone though. She didn't return my message, and I never spoke to her or saw her again. I have no idea what really happened that day, and I really hope that I never find out. I work out a lot. I've always been really obsessed with staying fit. I've also had training in wrestling and some martial arts. Although I don't particularly like the idea of fighting, I think I could do more than just hold my own in a fight. This is pretty important to know because it makes my story that much scarier. Now, this happened in the fall, so of course the sun had been setting a whole lot earlier. I like to get out and jog right before the sun set, because it was nice to watch the fall sunset while I was exercising. So there I was, jogging, when I decided to cut through this park. It was a pretty big area, with a path running through the forest. When you came out of that wooded area, the path went by this big field with a children's playground right in the middle. When I was running past this playground, I stopped to get a brief look at the sunset. When I did, I noticed that there was a lone kid at the playground. They looked pretty young, and I thought it was weird they were out so late by themselves. I was just about to start jogging again when I noticed something else. There was a strange man standing just outside of the playground. He moved forward a bit and leaned against the swing set for a while. I don't know why I stood there and kept watching, but there was something about this guy that made me feel pretty uneasy. I wasn't sure if he had seen me yet or not, because his back was facing me the whole time. But he certainly hadn't been on the playground when I first showed up, so I doubted he was the parent of this lone child. The man walked up to the kid, and they looked like they were talking. I noticed the kid back off a little from the man, and the kid looked quite scared. I began to get quite concerned. I wasn't sure how I should tackle the situation yet. The kid stood up and began to back away from the man. I thought I should go up to them and see what was wrong. I began lightly jogging up to the playground. In a split second, however, the man grabbed the kid by the arm. The kid was doing his best to struggle and move away, but the man had a good grip on him. The kid began yelling, and I realized this person was either an abusive parent or a child abductor. I had to do something right now. I ran up to the guy and grabbed the arm that was grabbing the kid. I jerked his arm away. The kid got loose and fell to the ground. I twirled the guy around, so he was now facing me. I got a good look at his face. He was certainly a scary-looking man. He was thin and pale and looked like he hadn't been washed in quite some time. It was nasty looking, but the worst part were his eyes, which were totally crazed. The man, who was much smaller than me, turned his attention away from the child and jumped on me. He tried to knock me over. I was surprised because I was much bigger than him, but somehow he succeeded in taking me to the ground. The man was abnormally strong, and the fight was one of the hardest ones I've ever had in my life. He was screaming something about needing blood or something like that. After a struggle, I was able to subdue him by flipping him over onto his stomach and holding his arms behind his back with my left hand and knee. I tossed my cell phone over to the child and told him to call 911 right away. He didn't hesitate to do so. I held the still struggling man down until the police arrived. They took over from there and arrested him soon after. That's not the end of the story though. I was there when the kid was talking to the cops, and the story he told them was quite scary. He told the police that the man had suddenly approached him, asking to play a game together. The kid was put off right away. He didn't want to play with this stranger, especially a stranger as freaky as this guy was. When the child backed off, the man grabbed him and started growling in his face, telling him that he kept seeing scary things. He told the kid he needed to drain all of his blood in order to make the visions go away. The guy was on some pretty serious drugs and was also mentally ill. I guess he suffered from schizophrenia or something, and the drugs made it worse. I heard he might have been on PCP or something. It was the first time I'd ever been around someone who was so high on drugs. It also explains how that little man was able to put up such a good fight with me. It chilled me to think about the fight after that, because who knows what would have happened if he had managed to win. Most fortunately though, the kid was all right in the end. I checked up with him later, and he wasn't too mentally scarred about the whole thing, so that's the most important in the end, I guess. Now, I'm not 100% certain if these two events are correlated, but they certainly might be. I had an extremely messy breakup with a girl when I was in my 20s, which is quite a long time ago now. It was like something you might see out of a movie. We yelled, we screamed, we called names and threw things at each other. It ended with her and I mutually screaming as she left the house. I was at the door, screaming back as she walked to her car, and supposedly drove her way out of my life. I didn't hear from her for the rest of the week. In fact, I was quite relieved not to. I knew it would just lead to more drama in the end. I was hoping that everything would get back to normal and I would never see her again. So it was on the weekend when I was home by myself that I had an experience that part of me thinks was instigated by her. I had gotten home pretty late on a Saturday night, after having been out at bars with some friends of mine. I wasn't ready to go to bed just yet, so I decided to keep having a few drinks in my home. Hey, I knew I was going to pay for it in the morning, but that was fine with me at the time. I had my television beside the window that faced out in my living room. That way I could just look over and see what was going on outside. Not that much was actually going on ever, but if it was, I would know about it right away. I guess you could also say I'm kind of paranoid, and if I'm watching TV and someone comes to the door, I want to be able to see who it is before they get there. Normally, I don't pay that much attention if I see someone just walking on the sidewalk in front of my house or something though. It's normal that kids and random people do that. This night, however, I did take notice of a particular person passing by. It was because this guy was very large and scary looking. He was also overly dressed for what the weather was like. What really got my attention though was that he kept glancing over at my house. I wasn't sure if he could see me or not, but I could sure see him. After the glances over to my house, he kept on walking on his way. I found that quite strange, but I soon put it out of my mind and went back to watching TV for a while. Feeling that I wanted another drink, I got up to go to the kitchen. There was a sliding glass door facing my backyard. I didn't normally pay much attention to my backyard, but when I turned out the lights this time, I don't know why, but I glanced over into the backyard out of instinct. At first, I couldn't quite make out what I was seeing, but I soon knew that it looked like someone or something was in my backyard. There was a shadowy figure. For a few moments, I thought it might be my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark. I walked up closer to the window to get a better look. When I tried my porch light, it wouldn't turn on because the bulb was out. I was looking and realized that there was indeed someone in my backyard. They were standing far enough back in the dark that I couldn't see them clearly. but it looked like a large man. My mind immediately went back to the man I had seen walking in front of my house earlier. He must have realized I'd seen him because he began moving quickly toward the door. The door fortunately was closed, but it was not locked. I had to move very quickly to flick the lock. Fortunately, I did so before the man grabbed the handle. At this point, I was able to get a good look at the man. He was huge, wearing a black jacket. His jacket opened as he moved, and I saw a large knife hidden inside. That scared the crap out of me. The man started tugging at the handle of the door. Although it was locked, he was mercilessly pulling on it. I was afraid he might easily break the lock and force himself through. I ran to the living room closet and grabbed something in there that I had to protect myself. I kept hearing him pulling on that door handle and eventually heard the lock break and the door open. He got into my house. I stood in the doorway of the closet as the man entered. When I saw him, he'd already pulled his knife out of his sheath. When he saw me, though, he stopped in his tracks when he saw my gun pointing straight at him. "Get the fuck out of my house," I breathed. Suddenly, I was the one with more power, but I was still terrified. I didn't really know if I could shoot someone. I had never been in a situation to shoot anything other than a target. I just hoped the man wouldn't hear the fear in my voice. He took one step forward toward me, as if daring me to shoot at him. At that moment, it seemed like my body just took over, and I pulled the trigger. The man was hit in his left arm. He quickly recoiled and yelled in pain. However, he didn't keep still very long. He got up and ran out the back door of the house. I actually stood there for God knows how long, terrified about what just happened. I knew I needed to get up and call the police, but I was just frozen in place with that gun for a while. Finally, I did call. They looked around and I gave a description of the man. Interestingly enough, the guy was soon picked up when he was found lurking behind a convenience store. I actually had to go to the precinct and there was a lineup. I was able to identify him quickly. The reason I brought my girlfriend up in the beginning was that she knew this guy. I suspected she had set this up, but that was never proven and she was never arrested. The attacker did get a jail sentence for aggravated assault, so I guess there's some justice in that. We're going back almost 10 years ago now. One morning, I dropped my son off at school, then drove over to a nearby 7-Eleven with my infant daughter. It was pretty early in the morning, so there were only one or two other customers. One of them was an older-looking man with a walker who was slowly making his way around the store. I didn't pay too much attention to him, other than feeling kind of sorry for him. I picked up the few items I needed and headed out to my car. Right as I was putting my daughter in her car seat, I heard a voice call out from behind me. I turn and it's the old man with a walker, only there's something weirdly different about him now than when I saw him inside the store. He was walking straight upright, not leaning on the walker, and his voice sounded much younger than you would have expected from looking at him. I remember him saying, "Cute kid, huh?" Then, as I turned around, I only got the slightest look at the man in his brand new posture before he slammed the walker into the back of my legs. The force made my knees buckle, and I almost fell right on top of my young daughter. I'm not exactly the tallest woman in the world, so the height reduction from my knees buckling had me falling forward into my open car. I tried really hard not to crush her as I fell. I honestly thought he was trying to get me, which was bad enough, but when he grabbed me by the hair and started to drag me up and off my daughter, I realized he was trying to get her instead. I honestly didn't think I could get any more terrified, but the realization he was actually trying to take my infant daughter away from me was too much to bear. I remember letting out the loudest, most ear-splitting scream I've ever let out in my life, begging him not to take my baby. He was so much stronger and faster than he looked. I guess that was all part of his fiendish scheme to have everyone let their guards down around him. It honestly seems like divine intervention now that I look back at it, but someone was just pulling into the small parking lot just as he almost had a hand on my daughter. Seeing the struggle, they instinctively honked their horn over and over in a bid to break us up. I think they must have figured at first it was just an incident of spousal abuse or something because they were only honking and didn't get out of their car. That was until I started screaming, "He's trying to take my baby!" The moment they heard that, they burst out of their driver's side door. The man sprinted past the passenger side and out towards the main highway. The second he did, another car came speeding by and stopped him. I first thought it might have been another person coming to tackle him or something, but instead the guy climbed into the second car and it sped off with a screech of its tires. What horrified me in the aftermath was that this was quite clearly a well-planned and almost perfectly executed attempt to kidnap my daughter. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if it had worked on a previous occasion. After the kind stranger calmed me down, they helped me call the cops, and I tried my best to calm my daughter down in turn. She was still too young to know what was really going on, but she'd picked up on my distress enough to be wailing and crying until I managed to lull her to sleep. The cops who arrived at the 7-Eleven a short while after said they'd never heard of such a thing happening there before, but they were able to check the cameras outside to try and get a clear image of the getaway car's license plate. I stuck around long enough to find out the car's plates came back as stolen. The cop I spoke to said there was a good chance they'd just ditched the vehicle somewhere after wiping it down for prints. If they'd already planned such a detailed operation here, there was a good chance they'd planned for it failing too. The only saving grace was that the officer assured me that my report was a step towards catching them. A small step, but a step nonetheless. The horrifying experience I went through that morning was not for nothing, as not only did the cops now have a description of the man who tried the kidnapping, but their failure to kidnap my daughter meant they'd probably think twice before trying the same plan on someone else. I took a lot of comfort in that idea. If it wasn't for the cop taking the time to reassure me of that, I don't think I'd have dealt with the trauma half as well as I did in the months that followed. I did a lot of praying too, of course. Desperate prayers that whoever had planned such a horrifying kidnapping would never ever be successful, and that no one else would have to endure the pure horror I did that day.